much. It's a little hot, but other than that, we're doing well.
Well, listen, as somebody who's living in the Pacific Northwest, who's both incapable of handling hot weather and looking down the barrel of 106 degrees for the next 3 days, you do not have my sympathy, sir.
No, yeah,
Uh,
that's fair. You are fully correct on that
yeah,
one.
it's like, what the fuck, man? This is not what we moved to Portland for, this hot weather. Anyway, it's brutal. My apologies if my voice sounds a little hoarse, a little rough around the edges. I was hanging out with some good, dear high school friends last week, and wouldn't you know, we were doing a lot of talking and yelling and screaming and excited to see one another, staying up late, not treating my voice well. So my apologies if that's coming through. In the meantime, welcome everybody. We're here to talk cheap flights. We're here to talk travel. We're here to talk whatever's on your mind. Drop your questions or comments in the comment section below or to the side, and we're going to get to as many as we can. By law, I have to answer the first one no matter what. So make sure you are the one who gets that. All right. Julian, we got anything yet?
Yeah, we can just start right in from our first question. She says from Katie. She says, "Hey guys, or hi guys. Do you think the new variants are going to change international travel again?" Good question.
Great question, Katie. Short answer, basically no if you're vaccinated. If you're vaccinated, I would expect very little to change in terms of where you can visit as an American traveler. To my knowledge, there is only one country that has uh, uh, had previously allowed in vaccinated American travelers that now requires a mandatory quarantine, and that's Israel. Nowhere else has put in any kind of blockades on vaccinated American travelers. What I would expect is to have a bit of a strengthening in some countries, some number of countries. So you might see places that had allowed in all Americans now say only vaccinated Americans visit. Or you might see some countries that had allowed vaccinated Americans say now vaccinated Americans need to bring a negative test. But I think you're going to see very, very few countries restrict vaccinated Americans from being able to visit even in spite of the new variant, which again underscores just how wonderful and effective and amazing and lucky we are to have such amazing scientists and such amazing folks helping out with those studies, like our own dear Allison Parkin. Is a modern miracle, and we are so grateful that it's helping us be able to get back to a normal life, even when kind of scary changes like these happen.
Yeah, I didn't hear your voice, any difference in voice until you started answering that question, and then I'm
Ah,
like, okay,
that
fair
frog in
enough.
my throat just won't go
Yeah,
away.
I know. All right, Bobby says Yellow Springs is good stuff. Yeah, I see the shirt. Is that Yellow Springs, like the Yellow Springs, or is that somewhere
It
else?
is the Yellow Springs. Most folks know it as the home of one Dave Chappelle, who is not only a beloved resident, our favorite son, but also the hometown where I grew up. Spent the first, 16, 17. I guess I moved there when I was 3. So I spent 15 years of my life there growing up. But yeah, it's a wonderful little village in Southwest Ohio.
So the stomping grounds of Dave Chappelle and Scott Kais. Like
It's
it's a
where
package deal now.
flights and comedy began, the perfect marriage, if
Yeah.
I've ever seen it.
There you go. The greatest collab to ever come through. Lana says hi. Carl says hi. Hi guys. Evelyn says currently Norway isn't recognizing U.S. vaccines. Where can I go to check updates on when this might change?
The best place that I've found to check these things is either Norway's tourism website, their health ministry site, or the U.S. State Department, which keeps their like travel portal in the State Department will have kind of running updates. The U.S. Embassy, for instance, in Oslo, will kind of constantly be updating that information. Norway, to my knowledge, right now is one of 2 countries in Europe that Americans cannot visit, that American tourists are barred from, and the other one being Hungary. Everywhere else in Europe right now is open, at least to vaccinated American tourists, and so we're excited for Norway to get there as well. Hopefully that'll happen not too distant future, but those are the places that I would be checking to see any updated news.
There you go. Yeah.
The only other thing that I would say is that there are a couple exceptions. I don't know them. I don't have them like listed off the top of my head, but oftentimes they have exceptions for like if you're visiting family member who's there. Sometimes there's a significant, they call it the boyfriend or girlfriend exception. Or one of the other ways to be able to go is if you go to Europe first. And then I don't know the exact requirement, but if like, for instance, you might be able to go to the Netherlands for a week or two and then go up to Norway. Again, I would look up the specifics because oftentimes it varies on where you are flying from, not necessarily what nationality you are. But it just depends how important this trip is. If it's seeing a relative who you haven't gotten to see for more than a year, maybe it's worth a week or two in Netherlands. If it's just a vacation, perhaps not.
Yeah. All right. Ashley asks, is it possible? This is a fun one. Is it possible to find cheap flights during popular travel times such as Thanksgiving week, Christmas break, spring break, and holiday weekends, etc.?
It's absolutely possible. It's going to be more difficult because the more popular times to travel, the more competition you have for those cheap seats, and the sooner they tend to sell out. And so that's why our best advice is if you're hoping to travel during a peak travel period, like you mentioned, Thanksgiving, Christmas, spring break, holiday weekends, your best bet is to always book opposite season. Remember, swimsuits are cheapest in the winter, down jackets are cheapest in the summer, and flights tend to be cheapest opposite season when you're traveling during those peak periods. So if you're hoping to travel during Thanksgiving or Christmas, be looking at those flights now. You don't necessarily have to book them now because there's never you never know with any certainty, will the price go up to tomorrow? Will it go down? What's it looking like? But around now and for the next month is when I would really be kind of focusing on that, because if you put it off until October or November of booking those flights, your odds of getting a cheap flight are very, very low. The one last thing that I will say here, Thanksgiving week, as detailed in Take More Vacations, is actually the hidden best week to travel internationally. And that's because, for two reasons. One, many folks already have time off work or school, so they got time to be able to travel. Most of us use that time to go home and visit family, have some turkey, watch some football. It's great. But all those people who are traveling domestically are by definition not traveling internationally. And so you have all these flights, all these seats that are empty on Thanksgiving week to Italy, to South Africa, to London, wonderful place to visit that you can actually get really good deals on, again, if you're traveling internationally. So, give your apologies to the family, or better yet, go ahead and book them a ticket and bring them along with you if you're traveling internationally over Thanksgiving.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say, out of a lot of the holiday weekends, Thanksgiving week is a week that we generally see more deals compared to some of the other weekends. So yeah, definitely that. Kira has a great question. Asks, just learned about this page/site. Welcome. We're happy to have you here. And asks, interested to hear what you have to say and if the deals are for real. Scott, are you real? And
I am real. Kira, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Yeah.
Look, I can tell you till the cows come home that these deals are real. What I have to say, I think what would actually work best though is anybody else who's watching, if you've gotten a deal that we have sent out at Scott's Cheap Flights, if you have personally been able to book a cheap flight, let us know where you went, where you're going, and what type of price you saw. Because anything I say, look, if I were in your shoes, I would be suspicious. I mean, who is this guy? How does he know cheap flights? But hearing it from other people about the amazing places they were able to book and go for way less than you're expecting to pay, in my mind, that's the best way. So if anybody else has watching has any of those examples, please let Kira know in the comment section. We would love to see it, and just to be able to celebrate with you those great deals you're able to score.
Yeah. Uh, all right. Ken answering Evelyn's question, a great interactive site that shows the restrictions for every country. Yeah, Kayak does have a very good website that shows that. That's a resource that we use as well. So yeah, highly recommend that website. All right. Suan asks, I have plans to go to Iceland and I'm thinking about canceling because I'm worried about testing positive on the way back, although I've been vaccinated, and then having to quarantine for 10 days. I can't stay for an additional 10 days because of work. What do you suggest Iceland is for mostly outside activities?
So I didn't catch the last part of that. Can you
So
repeat that?
I think she's asking more like, what are some of the more outside activities that Iceland has to
Mm.
offer, or what are some activities where, I guess maybe the possibility of catching COVID is decreased.
Yeah, so this is a great question. I think one of the things, a little bit of a how it's some of the misnomers when it comes to travel. It's not the flight to your destination that I think is the risky part of travel. The actual being on the airplane tends to be actually pretty low risk because of a lot of ventilation and safety features that many of us have come to learn about during the pandemic. Things like fresh air constantly being pumped into the cabin throughout the flight, so that ventilation, the downward airflow from the little ceiling fans pushing the air you breathe, not sort of lingering like you would be in a normal unventilated room, but it's pushing it all down. So there's less kind of mixing of air. The fact that there's HEPA filters on board, which recycle the air every couple of minutes and take out 99.97% of particles, and the fact that masks are required is why we haven't seen airplanes be super spreading events or super spreading locations the way folks might have expected early on in the pandemic. But then the question is, well, what are you doing when you're traveling? What are you doing at your destination? And the good thing about Iceland, even though I've never been, I've talked with enough folks who have done Iceland and done it really well to say that it is absolutely a place that you can go and basically spend almost no time in crowded situations with
Yep.
other people. Because one of
Yeah.
the favorite things that many folks like to do in Iceland is you get to Reykjavik, you rent a like camper van or some sort of RV or something, and then basically just do what's called the ring road, just around the island, around the perimeter, stopping off at amazing destinations along the way, maybe camping if it's warm enough, maybe sleeping in the van if you have one, tons of hotels, cabins, hostels, places where you can be socially distant from others. So in a lot of ways, I think Iceland is one of the most ideal places to be able to
Yeah.
take COVID safe vacation right now. But you're absolutely right that it is still currently the requirement that for anybody entering the US, including vaccinated Americans, you need to have a negative test taken at least or no more than 3 days before your return flight. And obviously that needs to be a negative. And so that's something, to consider with international travel and to consider with what you're doing when you're traveling.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what you said about Iceland, almost everything or the majority of things to do are just seeing how beautiful the outdoors and nature of Iceland is. So I agree. I would say the majority of all the like activities are going to be outdoor. You can easily space out between people, and yeah. So I highly recommend the ring road, like Scott said. All of the waterfalls, as many waterfalls that you can fit in. You can't go wrong with waterfalls in Iceland. So, Amanda asked, "Do you think airlines will end the mask mandate for 2-year-olds? I can't get my little one to wear one, and it's killing my travel."
Listen, as the father, as also the parent of a 2-year-old, I sympathize 100%. I think it would be difficult to get my daughter to try to wear a mask, and I wish that requirement were a little bit higher because 2-year-olds just man, it's really like if it were even 3 years old or 4 years old, I think it would be a lot easier to be able to explain just the reasoning. 2 years old, forget it. So I am right there with you. Will the mask mandate end? It's currently scheduled to expire on September 13th. I think it's very unlikely that it ends then. I think it's very likely that it gets extended at least through the end of 2021. In part because Delta variant, in part because it's just easier to continue with precautions than to take a risk, justified or not. Now, look, there is a possibility that it could get modified, that we could see it be, optional but strongly encouraged for 2 to 4 year olds, 2 to 5 year olds, something like that. Uh, uh, any of those are possibilities when it comes to September, the September 13th expiration or renewal. But I think the most likely scenario is it gets renewed, and it gets renewed verbatim as it is right now.
Yeah. Julie asks, are you beginning to see good deals for Q4 2021? I need a vacation.
Absolutely, we are, and actually, I would say that's probably the sweet spot. I mean, Julian, I'd love to hear what you have to say here, but in a lot of ways, the best deals come in that sort of like 2 to 4, 2 to 5, 2 to 6 months out. Like that's when I think you tend to see the most deals. You don't tend to see them as much like a year in advance, just because airlines don't tend to discount those fares. And you don't tend to see them in the last month before travel, because again, those last minute flights tend to get really expensive. The fare tends to get jacked up, not decrease. So that 2 to 4, 2 to 6 months out, which we're in right now for Q4, is the sweet spot for cheap flights. And what are you seeing, Julian?
No, that's exactly it. The majority or a lot of our deals right now that we're sending has availability in Q4. A lot of it also has availability in Q1 of 2022. But whether it be domestic travel, we are seeing a good amount of domestic deals. I mean, major cities, national parks, like pretty much there's no region or section that we haven't seen a good deal to. Obviously, it depends on where you're flying out of, but generally, we have seen very good domestic Q4 deals, and we are still seeing a good amount, like Scott said, the 2 to 4 months of international deals as well. We're seeing, a good amount of the Thanksgiving deals that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, there was a great deal a week or two ago to the Poland Christmas markets, which again is one of those was like beautiful, wonderful times to be in kind of that area of Europe, but that is not, you don't often see anything resembling cheap. And these were around $500 round trip, which again is less than half of what I would normally expect to pay to fly to kind of northern Europe during that Christmas period. And so now, doesn't have to be today, but now and for the next 4, 5, 6 weeks is when I would really be focusing on, if you're hoping to try to get a flight or get a big trip scheduled for the winter holiday period.
Yeah, that's why this is a great question. This is the time to look and book. So there you go. Good friend Enrique, our Lululemon hookup. He says, "Hi SCF team, hello Julian and Scott. I have a question. I have a 1.3K voucher and I thought that said I have a 1.3K voucher and a fiance. For me and fiance. Does it expire on the date given, or may I travel after the end of day March 31st, 2022? P.S. He's at work. He's at Lululemon. There you go.
Awesome. What's up, Enrique? Listen, I'm so glad you asked this question, because this is actually a crucial thing that many folks might overlook when they're talking or thinking about vouchers. Each voucher has an expiration date, but it's going to vary voucher to voucher, airline to airline, whether that expiration date refers to the date that you have to travel by or just the date that you need to book your flights by. Because obviously, if it's travel by, then you got to start to kind of plan now-ish for February, March. But if it's just you have to book something by then, you could end up booking something for next summer, next fall, like whenever, you have a lot more flexibility. It should say on that voucher that you have whether that expiration date refers to the travel by date or the book by date. I'm hoping it's the book by date, but it's hard to say from a distance without seeing the fine print.
Yeah. Answering Sue Ann's question from earlier, KK says Iceland is such an easy place to travel. You can do a ton of hiking. You can also visit hot springs, waterfalls, etc. So yeah, there you go. All of the outdoor things that you would want. Um, and then she also asked, Scott, will you consider a Black Friday sale on the book? I'm wanting to purchase about a dozen. Wow, for teachers, coworkers, family holiday gifts. That's amazing. I love
Okay,
that.
first of all, that is so sweet and thoughtful of you. I
Yeah.
love that. Gosh, man, I wish I had control of the pricing. Funny thing about writing a book and doing it through a traditional publisher is you don't have any control over what it's priced at, when there are sales or not. The good news is that I think most either publishers or booksellers tend to run Black Friday sales, and each of them also tends to have bulk ordering discounts. So I would absolutely, it's not something that I have any control over, but your favorite, local independent bookseller, your favorite online mega retailer, whatever it is, I would actually just give them a ring, shoot them an email and say, hey, look, yeah, I'm looking to buy 12 copies of this. Is there a bulk discount available? Because in many cases there will be.
There you go. Carl asked a question. I'm not fully sure of the actual question. Scott, maybe you have some more insight into this. So, his first message is, "I'm sitting on a 277 flight on tap due to SEF. Boom, there you go. For Thanksgiving break to Rome, and I'm definitely going. Waiting to find my Paris trip with Delta for February." Which leads him to his question,
I
which
think that's
is,
actually Cartagena trip. It was
oh,
CTG.
CTG. Oh yeah,
Mm.
you were completely correct. Oh man, rough.
There's a little flight nerd discussion because
Yeah.
CDG is
Oh,
Paris,
wow.
but CTG is Colombia, Cartagena.
Yeah, you are completely correct. I
All
just
good.
I can't read today. Anyways, this question is: I'm waiting for a Delta flight to Cartagena from Boston, but they seem to have changed the route. I assume your algorithm magic, hocus pocus, in finding cheap flights has that into account. Do certain airlines alter or change the cheap flight stage?
Ooh, I'm not entirely sure exactly what the question here is, but what I will say is this: the single biggest determinant of how many cheap flights you see on a route is just how much competition there is between airlines. It's not how far you fly. Folks know I love to bring up the example of that deal we found from Pittsburgh to Tokyo for $316 round trip. You could fly either to Tokyo for that price, or you could fly from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia for the same price. So it's not how far you fly, it's competition between airlines that tends to drive the availability of cheap flights. And one of the good things that we've seen is that a lot of the airlines, especially the budget airlines like Frontier and others, are really kind of ramping up the number of flights that they're flying to Latin America and the Caribbean. So I think the outlook for cheap flights to that sort of general region is quite good. Um, I think that, it's hard to say specifically will this happen on Delta, but those price decreases, they tend to happen industry wide. Airlines tend to follow the leader. One airline will set a price, and they know that if Frontier is selling their flight for $200, excuse me, and Delta is selling it for $400, and it's on the same route, almost everybody's going to buy the Frontier flight. Delta knows this, Frontier knows this, and so they have to try to match the budget airlines, at least getting in the ballpark of the price. And so this is why it's great when an airline like Frontier or Spirit, even if you never fly them, it's great when they enter these new markets because they lower the price on Delta and American United, et cetera. There was a paper written on this 5 years ago that deemed what is called the Southwest effect. That when Southwest enters a new market, the fares on that route that they just entered tend to drop an average of 24%. When JetBlue does it, it drops like 25%. Same with Spirit, same with Frontier. I mean, it's all basically double-digit fare drops, and so I think the outlook looks quite good, even if we're not able to say with certainty, oh yeah, there will 100% be a cheap flight in February from Boston to Cartagena. The good news is that, again, 6 months out, traveling during a low travel period like February, traveling on from a good cheap flight city like Boston to at least decent cheap flight city like Cartagena, being in the region, I think the outlook is quite good. I don't think you're going to end up having to pay, $500, $600, $700 for that. Whether we're able, keep our fingers crossed that we can find it like $200, but I would be surprised if you end up having to pay more than 300, and that's round trip.
Um, Jim Jim asks, new member, do Thailand discount flights come up often? I mean, we've sent them. We actually sent a Thailand deal, I would say, about a month ago. We used to see them, I would say, pretty consistently. Recently, we haven't seen them too often, but they do come along, and it does seem like they are starting to come back, maybe a little bit more. So
I would
yeah,
expect, yeah, and I would expect to see a lot more Thailand deals
yeah.
pop up once Thailand reopens its borders much in a much bigger way for international tourism. You know, right now we're caught in a little bit of a cat and mouse game where there aren't many deals to Thailand because airlines aren't flying many planes to Thailand because tourists can't really go to Thailand. But once Thailand, you know, right now they've got what's called the Sandbox program, where basically you can go to Phuket and only Phuket. So you can stay on the island. There's a bunch of, you know, bureaucratic rigmarole, but you can visit Phuket. Once the nation as a whole opens up, I think you would expect to see not only a real sharp increase in demand, like we see with other countries when they reopen, but also a pretty sharp increase in the number of airlines flying there, the number of routes they're flying. And so while there's not a ton today to Thailand, you know, in a few months or whenever it is that Thailand does reopen, I think you can expect to see a lot more deals pop up.
This is one of our senior flight experts himself answering that Thailand question. So if you're interested, he says, ironically, some of the best current deals to Phuket are in relatively high margin business class seats. Daniel always coming in with the best information. He knows all. So
there you go. So if you've saved up a little money from not traveling as much during the pandemic, hoping to treat yourself to a lie flat cush business class seat on the flight over to Phuket, we are finding those deals, sending them out to members on our elite tier, and they're popping up, according to Daniel, even more than normal. And so this is great news.
KK says, I love the new features on my dashboard. Scott snaps. I love that. Yeah, there's been a lot of updates recently. I mean,
yeah, Joe, can you give folks a real quick walkthrough of like just 60 seconds of kind of what new sorts of features we've unveiled just in the past couple weeks?
This is what I'm trained for. We've added route pages. So route pages in itself, they are beautiful new pages. So we used to have deal pages, which showed you all of this information, and we've kind of transformed that into what we now call route pages. So now you're able to see specific pages on, just say, LAX to Paris, and you get all of the information. And even when there isn't a deal, you still get a lot of this extra information of what deals are currently live to Paris from other cities that you could look at. Aircraft information. One of my favorites is the price chart, where it shows, average deal that we've sent, the last deal we've ever sent, the best deal we've ever sent. So a lot of these great things, along with if there is a deal, we'll show you the deal that's on there. And then one of the coolest additions that we've added recently, and the team did a great job with this, is we added search onto our site. So you can now, right now it is from your home airport, but you can search, hey, I want to go to Thailand. And you type in Thailand, and it'll bring you to the Thailand route page from your home airport, and you can see if there's a deal or not. So it makes kind of the customization and trying to see if there's a deal so much easier, because you don't have to wait for the email. You can go in yourself, see if there is a deal right now. And then we also have a button called Feeling Adventurous, which will bring you to a random deal route page. And maybe you'll find your next trip based off that. So a lot of great stuff that we've just released, a lot of great stuff coming, honestly. So super, super excited. And KK, I'm glad you like it. The team's put in a lot of work with that. So awesome. All right. Another question from Vito. He says, been with you guys since the beginning. Love that. Traveled to my dream places, Australia and New Zealand, a few years back. Thank you. Any idea of when you think travel there will be back open, Scott?
So the Australian, I don't know as many specifics on New Zealand. I would expect them to be relatively in concert with one another. So let's focus on Australia. The Australian government released a framework a couple months back that was frankly pretty pessimistic about when that return to travel will happen, when they'll open for tourism. All like basically no chance this year. I would be very, very surprised if it's not sometime in 2022. But the question, obviously, that's a 12-month window. One of the things that gives me some sense of optimism is that quietly over the past month or two, Australia's vaccination rate has pretty quickly taken off. Even a month or two ago, they were in basically single digits or low teens of vaccination rate. Now they're above 40. They're in the like 40% range and going up every single day. And so, when they'll hit that sort of 75-80% that they're really targeting to be able to start to allow some of those more kind of activities to resume, hard to say. But whether or not that will happen anytime soon is, I would not be super optimistic, especially considering that by and large, the Australian government, I think, has taken a much more cautious, conservative approach to these types of things and to just COVID precautions in general. So when the, best guess, Scott, okay, you got to pick a month and year when Australia and New Zealand will be back open for American tours. March 2022. That's my best guess. Yeah. That's my guess. We'll see. We're following this super close. Keep asking this on when we're coming back on in every week or two, because we want to keep up with this information. I know folks are curious about Japan, folks curious about Thailand, elsewhere. Definitely keep checking in with us because we're following it. And I'll do my best to try to read the tea leaves, even if I can't give you any sort of 100% definitive sense. Obviously, if I have that, I'm going to pass it along. But right now, it's just a matter of guessing game.
Yeah. All right. One final question, Scott?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So this is an interesting one. This is kind of a comment that Timothy made, but I actually did want to bring it up and kind of get your take on it, Scott. So Timothy just said, he just jumped in. He says, I think people need to be very aware of what they are buying with Allegiant, Spirit, and Frontier, among others. When things happen, you can expect mayhem. Unless it's a frivolous trip with refundable stuff on the other end, don't do it. Because one of the reasons they have no reciprocal agreements. And obviously we've heard about the Spirit cancellations within the past week or 2 weeks. I think past week. Scott, what are your thoughts on kind of that in general, where of Allegiant, Spirit, Frontier, budget airlines, and some of the cancellations that are coming through?
Absolutely, and I appreciate your raising this point, Timothy, because it is.
Yeah,
I've got cat hair just flying around me, because it's actually one of the things that I mentioned in Take More Vacations. One of the sections, believe it's in chapter 9, about why I don't personally fly budget airlines for the most part, even though I owe a huge debt of gratitude to them. The reason why I owe that debt of gratitude, like we mentioned, is because they are largely responsible for driving down fares industry-wide. Spirit flying to Puerto Rico and to Miami and to LA, and Frontier flying to Austin, all these are helping cause cheaper flights on any airlines that you might actually want to fly, Southwest, American, Delta, whoever. Setting aside the pandemic, which is hard to do because we're in it, but at least up through 2019, I think actually Spirit, at least among the budget airlines, had actually quietly pretty impressively improved their operation figures, whereas historically they had been, maybe 2/3 of their flights arrived on time. In 2019, it got up to 90 something percent, like basically in line with the major airlines in terms of what's called on-time performance. How often did the flight, not get delayed or canceled? Obviously, Spirit had a really rough week or two. A lot of folks were understandably very upset when their trips got canceled because Spirit couldn't get their operations together. And I think you raise an excellent point, and one that I discuss and Take More Vacations, that one of the main reasons not to book with a budget airline, again, if the price is similar, is that when things go wrong, they can go really wrong. If you're flying to, I don't know, gosh, let's say Costa Rica, if you're flying on Spirit and your Spirit flight gets canceled, you just have to wait for the next Spirit flight. And who knows when that will be, who knows, it might be full. Whereas if you have a flight on United and that United flight gets canceled, not only do they have a lot more flights, a lot more operation, but they also have partners. So you might get put on a flight on Copa Airlines. You might get put on a flight on Avianca. Like there are any number of different ways that you'll be able to get your final destination with far less of a delay than with some of the budget airlines, where a cancellation or delay might mean you're out, a day or two in your travels. So that's why I personally tend to avoid it. Now, look, if I'm flying, I don't know, to Denver and the flight on Spirit or Frontier is $500 cheaper than the next best option, yeah, I'm probably going to book one of those and just hope and pray for the best. But if it's $30, $40, $50, everybody's kind of personal preference is going to vary. I'll tend to go for the non-budget airlines because they tend to operate better. And last but not least, in case folks weren't aware, we do not send flights. We do not send out deal alerts. We do not send out fares on Spirit, Frontier, or Allegiant, in large part because folks don't want them. And we don't want to send you stuff you don't want. There are so many cheap flights available on full service airlines, on Southwest, on JetBlue, on Alaska, all these others, that there's no need to only think of cheap flights as something that is on Spirit or Frontier. That's my spiel. Thank you, Timothy, for raising that issue, because I think it's a really important one. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Your great questions. It is such a pleasure to chat with you all each and every week. Thank you to Julian, our host extraordinaire. And we will be back next Wednesday. Thanks, everybody.